Welcome to the Across the Bar podcast, where we talk about why today's headlines are important for your success at work. My name is Peter Rahbar, and I'm your first call on legal issues.
I'm Laura Brounstein, and I should be your first call for comms and content. And to rant about the State of the Union from last night. Is he still?
Yeah, I'm trying to get 1 hour, 48 minutes of my life back. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that.
Did most people in your life watch it? Because most people in my life did not. They were like, oh, why are you doing that to yourself?
Well, I was telling people to watch it. I watched it with some friends who were in town, but certainly some people opted out of it.
Yeah, I had a friend come over to watch it. I was like, I can't face it alone.
Just the being around each other and grunting and groaning over the various things that happen. It's
and not all him. I will say there is
very comforting.
There are things we can say about both sides' behavior last night, not just his. So we're going to talk about State of the Union, because I can't not. The latest round of the government's involvement in company decision-making and what that could mean precedent-wise. How AI is not great. This is breaking news, everybody. AI, not great for women. Stop the presses. We're going to talk about that. Oh, the latest thing that is hurting the restaurant industry, something Peter and I both care very deeply about. And how much sleep should your company guarantee you get a night? I love that story. But let's start with the State of the Union, Peter. Overall, what do you think?
I thought it was pretty boring. I like the tributes to different heroes of the country, including the hockey team. But
Weren't they
overall,
maybe long? It was like,
yes.
How about a bat mitzvah, the candle lighting? It was like a bat mitzvah candle lighting that went on forever. And now I'm going to call up Uncle Shlomo and the hockey.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there were some really funny moments. I mean, like when he talked about how he would give himself the Medal of Freedom if he could, how every time he mentioned something that was named after him, he said it wasn't his idea to name it. That was pretty great.
Why is that thing that he does? I don't understand.
Well, there is a school of thought that everything he says, you're supposed to believe the opposite. So there's that. There was a moment where he gave double guns. I don't think I've ever seen a president give double guns. He kind of went both. Like he said something and went like that.
Not a pew pew.
No, just double guns. Yeah. That's kind of odd for a president, I think.
I thought his whole posture last night was interesting. Like he was leaning on the podium like somebody who has a hard time standing up for an hour. Like he was like this.
Well, he's usually sitting behind his desk, right? I mean, this is not, a man who does a lot of physical activity.
I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but like there was some Stephen Hawkins energy, I thought, in the way.
Oh boy, yeah, you are going to get in trouble for that.
Yeah. But he was just like hunched and lean. He was talking like this. But
yeah, look,
we shouldn't include that because it could look like him making fun of the differently abled reporter, which is.
Yeah, I would just say like the inspiring moments were when he talked about American heroes, and there was a lot of hateful moments, which was unfortunate, and the rest was like not really surprising or revealing in any way.
I think it was the State of the Union. There was no real forward-looking policy. The only forward-looking policy he really talked about was that, people in Congress shouldn't be able to trade, which fine if that also applies to the executive branch, because
it's quite a thing to say
when they didn't like.
Yeah, it's quite a thing to say when you've made a couple $1 billion off The Office and your sons are sitting right there and they've made a couple billion.
And that's just the beginning. And Steve Witkoff is like there in the audience, like, wow, I'm going to own a country. Like,
yeah, I didn't find many things that inspiring. From a work perspective, there was a lot of talk about building manufacturing jobs. We haven't seen that materialize. There was an announcement of a plan to create a 401k plan for those who don't have access to them with $1,000 match. Of course, that's from a Biden administration legislation. So
it's not happening.
Yeah, it hasn't happened yet, but it's not his idea. So, there's that. I mean, you'd love to see some real-time fact checking on this stuff, like, that.
Yeah. There was no policy talked about. He made up, I mean, no estimates show that there was as much fraud in Minnesota as he did.
Yeah.
No estimates.
A couple people in Minnesota stole $19 billion from the government. I have a hard time believing that. There's no support.
From what I understand, $19 billion is the total amount of aid that the state of Minnesota gets from the federal government.
Right.
So that money was not all used fraudulently. Maybe 1 billion from what
yeah,
I'm reporting,
again,
which is terrible. I'm not minimizing it, and obviously that needs to be dealt with, and it is being dealt with. And I think Governor Walz and Keith Ellison were on top of now are on top of it. I didn't love the lack of decorum overall, and I'm not like a big rules girl, but I didn't love the yelling back and forth with him and Ilhan Omar. I was glad she showed up because I disagreed with the decision of some Democratic leaders whom I greatly admire, who decided to not go. I didn't agree with that decision. I think your job, if you're a senator or a congressperson, is to go sit through that. I've had to go sit through many speeches for work that were boring.
Yeah.
I feel like you could have done that. But to be there, Jeffries had said if you were going to be there, you need to act with a certain amount of decorum, which Ilhan Omar did not do.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say with this president, I've always thought the best way to piss him off is to not talk about him or not react to him. And if everyone showed up and just sat there and didn't stand up except for, honoring the heroes, obviously that bothered him a lot. I mean, it is the thing that was driving him nuts, and it's driven him nuts before. He wasn't talking about people who weren't there. But it was also not just Democrats who weren't there. There were several Republican appointed Supreme Court judges who weren't there. I'm sure there were other people.
Yeah, Gorsuch was Gorsuch. It's you know what? Nah.
Yeah. So look, a lot of politics is theater, right? And we saw it play out. I was debating going down to a concert down the block. In retrospect, I wish I did that instead. But I think it's important to watch.
Witness it.
Yeah, I think it's important to watch. I think it's important for people to watch videos of speeches, for yourself, understand the facts, understand what people are actually saying, not someone else's interpretation of them.
You want to be able to have your own opinion. That is why I very much try to watch it live and to be sort of looking at reactions on social media live while it's happening, to be able to kind of get a feel for how I'm feeling and how it's being perceived publicly. So do you still, during something like, it used to be you spend that whole time on Twitter. Now I don't tweet. I used to be on Twitter all the time. Now I sort of check it.
You're a Threads person.
I'm a Threads girly. Threads is fun. You don't go on Threads enough.
I do. I mean, I'm really trying to figure out what to do there, because on X, so much of the stuff is just fake now. And at least in my feed, a lot of it is just totally fake. And again, I encourage people, if you see something that just doesn't seem to make sense or seems really outrageous, before you reshare it or, get in an argument with someone about it, make sure it's real. So I see a lot of that on X. I see less of it on Threads. At the same time, I don't find Threads that interesting. The algorithm, something's off.
You don't have a good algorithm.
So we'll see.
I'm going to tag you in some more things that
Great.
you enjoy.
Great.
And you can say, "Dear Algo, please send me," and it does. That works on Threads.
Okay, great.
Good note. It actually works. You can say, I've said, "Dear Algo, send me other journalists," and now my thread is tons of journalists, which is really fun.
You love AI and algos. That's your friend base. I mean, to be clear, you have a lot of friends, IRL friends, for sure. We know this.
One or two. Yeah. And for our lovely listeners, I will say 9 times out of 10 when I'm out with someone, turns out they already know Peter from something else.
9 times out of 10.
When we started this, I had no idea how overlapping our lives and social circles actually were.
Right.
Wow, you're everywhere. You're ubiquitous.
Deep insights. People are getting the real info here.
It's really important for everyone.
All right. Well, speaking of tech,
yeah,
we there was a great piece in the Financial Times this weekend about
such a good paper.
Yeah, my favorite. Weekend Financial Times is like literally my favorite thing. I
That
love
woman,
it.
that Zanny, who's the editor, is so fierce.
Yeah. How to spend it. That's what I like. Aspirational stuff. But there was a big piece on how tech has turned against women and specifically AI and some of the developments in AI and how these companies are staffed. And the overall point is, again, and I know you have some strong feelings about this, so I'll let you share those after this. But again, we are seeing a new phase of technology with AI where the companies are dominated by men. They employ mostly men. And shockingly, the output are products that have really harmful effects on women or are being used as weapons against women, including, recently there was some press about AI that was like removing clothing from women, literally, and being directed at teenagers in particular. And so, again, this raises the point of having diverse viewpoints in the room, having different groups of people present. And, one of the shocking moments last night was when the president said we've defeated DEI and his party stood up and applauded for that. It's pretty shameful, frankly.
I don't understand it. Like, I don't,
Yeah.
That is one place where there's many places where, as you know, I can be very centrist and very like, yeah, I see that point of view. I don't agree with it,
Right.
but I see it. I don't understand it in terms of DEI. We'll focus on the women part for a second, but our friend Lauren Rotolo threaded last night that or on Instagram maybe, she is a big advocate for differently abled people, for handicapped people, and she is petrified by what is going on right now because
She should be.
like
She should be.
You might think to yourself, well, I want to make sure the best people get the job. But also these things mean that there's no wheelchair ramps because they don't have to have wheelchair ramps if there's no DEI. Like all of these things that we sort of take for granted as guardrails to make us a workable society across the board are going to go away.
Right. And here with AI in a new technology that's transformative being developed, I think it's more important than ever to have some guardrails, including over who's making it, who's making decisions about it, how it's being regulated.
The problem is, I understand it. Yes, all of these companies, for myriad reasons, which we'll come back to, are mostly men. But one of the biggest problems is that the LLMs are mostly male. Like the language learning model that they're pulling from, the content is mostly generated by men because of where they're pulling content from and the fact that men have been a little bit more
and the people who are creating it are men. I mean, that's part of the whole thing. Like, do you think if there was a room that was half women and half men, a company would come up with a product that takes clothes off of women and teenagers?
No,
that probably wouldn't happen.
The sick mind of Elon Musk, I believe.
That probably wouldn't happen. I mean,
So even more insidious in some ways, like the overt stuff we see and we can attack. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't in this world at the moment. But what I think is really insidious is the tone shift that chat, at least, does a lot that softens women's voices. I have a running file of times where I said, chat, will you clean this up for grammar? Something I wrote, like just, clean it up. And it edited in addition to just kind of cleaning up the structure. And every time it made what I was saying slightly apologetic and less forceful and less voicey. And when I would call it out, I would say, why did you soften my tone here? It says, oh, you have an override that says keep your voice, but the general settings for chat is to soften voices so they are more acceptable, and we do that more with women's voices. There was a recent meme of Super Bowl night. There was a meme going around of people doing AI pictures of themselves, and I uploaded one, and my picture was kind of like this, facing forward.
Yeah.
And when it did the drawing, it was like this.
Slumped.
And I was like, why is my head tilting downwards? I look apologetic.
You look like Chalamet, like a little Chalamet pose there that you just did.
And it said, oh, that's how we're doing all women with this meme because the algorithm shows that this will be more, it will be more well received if women look slightly apologetic. Like it literally
Right.
says that.
And so
Pushing when I had the Romanticy podcast and I would try to use ChatGPT for the captions, it every time was like, you wouldn't believe that women read books for sexiness. And I'd be like, that is not what I said.
well,
Of course
look,
women
I
read
mean,
them.
you're raising a lot of issues here. I mean,
Sorry.
you know,
We'll like open the Pandora's box.
first of all, I would say probably the guys working on this stuff aren't spending a lot of time romancing anybody, so they definitely don't have that perspective. But you also mentioned two of the things. I had a talk with a female executive client yesterday, in fact, about two of the things you just said, which are the most frequent, like sort of coded gender discrimination
really?
things
What?
we see in the workplace are the complaints about women's tone that you never hear about men, and also, maybe being more apologetic. Maybe you should be more apologetic sometimes. Maybe you shouldn't take such a hard line. Those are things that I could tell you in my 26 years of practicing employment law. Really, unless a guy's screaming at the top of his lungs, you never hear about a guy's tone, and you never hear a guy being told to be more apologetic. True? I hear about women all the time. And when clients tell me that, I say, we're not going down that path.
All of the men who got pipped or fired or sent to an anger management counselor, you're saying the percentage of your clients that are men that part of what was cited was them being too aggressive is almost nil.
What it takes to trigger that is very different than what it takes to trigger it for women.
Much fewer also, like you've dealt with fewer of those cases.
No, I've dealt with plenty of men who've been pipped for aggressiveness, but aggressiveness for men is literally screaming or
so you're
cursing.
Just saying the Overton window is different for men and women.
Yeah, for women it's like your tone. Yeah, it's just your tone. What does that mean? So this is now being perpetuated through AI. I mean, and that's a problem because we don't have a broad group of people working on it. And that's the biggest problem. And we don't have real regulation. And in fact, we've talked about it on prior episodes. This administration doesn't want anyone to regulate AI, and that's frankly very dangerous.
Pursuant to that, that's a legal word. Didn't I say
there you go.
I said that. Pursuant. So there is a lot going on with Claude's internal rules and how our government feels about them. Overall, as a topic, which we'll kind of get back to the Claude piece of it, the Anthropic piece of it, this government, I thought Republicans wanted to stay out of business.
Right.
Why are they all up in everyone's business like this?
Yeah.
Get involved in the Warner Brothers deal.
Well, in several different ways. And in addition to Pete Hegseth threatening Claude and basically forcing them to do business with the government in a way that they don't want to do business with the government.
And the background of that is that Claude had as part of their internal charter that it would not be trained to work on defense systems, and that is no more.
Right. And then we also had the story this week where the president called out Netflix to remove Susan Rice from its board of directors. So like telling a company who should be on their board and who shouldn't be on their board. Again, the irony of all this is that corporate leaders supported this president because primarily not just taxes, but because they thought that the government was over-regulating and too involved in their business. And so now the regulations are gone, but the government is more involved in their business in ways that are less controllable, less transparent, more meddlesome, and more difficult, and are unfolding
harder to defend against.
And are unfolding on a public stage, right? So like you're dealing with regulators in the background, no one's seeing it. The president's calling on you to remove a board member in the press. You have to deal with it with everybody, and happening in the middle of a transaction.
Did they even reply on that? Did they do a public reply?
No, of course not, because you can't do that, to him. And so now they're in the throes of this transaction, which has gone back and forth, between Netflix and Warner Brothers, Paramount, Skydance. And the president clearly wants it to
Be his buddy.
end up with Paramount. Again, it's not his role. I mean, this is something that should be decided by the board of Warner Brothers.
Like, the whole reason for parts of our Constitution is that we don't want the president, the people in power, choosing the media. That is bad.
Right. And especially, this should be decided by Warner Brothers board, period. And they have fiduciary obligations to their shareholders, and basically that's going to boil down to who's paying the most for the asset.
About also not stakeholder management quite as much, a different kind. They have some responsibility to their staff also, or just the shareholders? Like, that's a big question.
That's a really good question, and that's something that's been debated. And I've heard some really smart people say some really stupid things about this. I mean, basically, their primary obligation is as fiduciaries, and you could take a broad interpretation of that. Some, in the last 50 years of the U.S. economy, that's been interpreted as making as much money for your shareholders as possible. But not all companies operate that way, and some of them have, regard for their employees and what's going to happen to them, and if they're fired, how much they're going to be paid, and all those things. But that's not at the top of the list, unfortunately. And I've heard some commentators say, well, unions should threaten to go on strike if Paramount gets it. And they can't. If they do that, they will lose their job. Under federal labor law, that is like the stupidest suggestion I've ever heard.
Why will they lose their job? Explain the federal labor law with this.
Because there are very limited reasons why a union could go on strike and still have job protection, and mostly it's because they're protesting an unfair labor practice. Who ends up with a company in a transaction is not an unfair labor practice. I mean, that's just, they could threaten that all they want. It's an empty threat. They're not going to strike if Paramount gets the company, and they're not going to strike if Netflix gets the company. It's stupid. Now, could they try and amplify their voice and say who would better serve their constituents? Sure. But threatening to strike that's a dumb suggestion.
Agree.
So
it would be a tragedy for, Ted Turner certainly had his issues, but he created something incredible in CNN, and I would hate to see the Ellisons own it. I'm pulling for you.
Also they don't seem to know how to run things that well, but that's just me.
They don't. Yeah, more on that another day.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a really fun one, and we've been ranting on things, or at least I have. Let's talk about the Centerview suit. Is your work required to let you get 8 hours of sleep? And what has New York State ruled on that?
Yeah, so there was a case in New York that's now settled that was brought by an investment banking analyst. Actually, this is instructive to everyone. The case was brought 5 years ago. This analyst was terminated in 2020. The lawsuit was filed shortly after in 2021. It was scheduled to come to trial this week, and it settled. And basically, the premise was this young woman started in Centerview's investment banking analyst program, 3-year program, and was working insane hours and had an anxiety disorder that required an accommodation of at least 8 hours of sleep. She wanted to be able to be uninterrupted between 1 a.m. and 9 a.m. That was what she asked for. And she initially got that accommodation, and then she was fired out of the blue one day and told that they couldn't, for business reasons, deal with her accommodation, that she needed to be available 24 hours a day, and she should have known that before taking the job, and that she should feel bad for taking someone else's spot in the program. These were all things told to her in the termination meeting.
I wish we knew how much money she got.
Well, she wanted millions of dollars. She only worked there for 3 months or so. And that's how cases end up in trial, when one side is just being irrational about what they want. I mean, someone who worked somewhere for 3 months at the beginning of their career, it's kind of tough to justify several $1 million even when the company's breaking the law. But, it brings up the topic of how accommodations work and how employers think about them. And so if you have a health condition that requires an accommodation, but still allows you to do your job, the employer is at a minimum required to have a discussion with you about it and figure out, hey, by federal law, the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, by state laws, by city laws here in New York, we have very aggressive city and state laws in particular that govern disability issues. And so if an employee has a health issue or some other related issue that requires an accommodation, they come forward to an employer and say, hey, I need this accommodation to do my job. The employer has an obligation to talk with them about it and figure out if it's something they could accommodate. And so in this case,
accommodations you've gotten approved for people.
Well, I mean, the one that I'll twist, not to be evasive. I will twist your question around a little bit and say the one that drives employers the craziest is work from home, especially now. And there are people with different conditions now, and this has obviously become a bigger thing post-COVID. But there are people who are either immune compromised or
I've had people try to claim agoraphobia.
Yeah, or have other anxiety issues or whatever. And the accommodation they ask for is, I need to be able to work from home either full time or several days a week.
But it's allowed to have the requirement to be in the office, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. So then the question for the employer is, can this employee do their job from home? That's the accommodation they ask for, and the employer has to evaluate that. Or is there another accommodation that could satisfy the employee, but also satisfy your business needs? And, an employer who has a 5-day in the office policy they'll just say, well, everyone else is in. And I'll say, well, that's not how the law works. You got to look, if this person can do their job from home and they have a legitimate condition.
Have you gotten approval for some people?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
What's a thing that people don't know to ask for, but usually gets approved? Like if you need it, you should ask for it.
Well, it used to be like chairs and keyboards and special types of desks and things like that.
Something.
Yeah, and now like there are people who need
where you could request a standing desk.
Right. And then some people, now that the open format office has become more prevalent over the past couple of years, there are some people with ADD or ADHD who need quiet areas where they could, concentrate.
Approved?
Sometimes. I mean, if an employer, like maybe an employer response would be, well, we don't have one, and okay, then what? Then can they work from home from some period of time?
I definitely knew people at Hearst that got approval for working in an office the size of a tiny closet because they said they couldn't focus out in the main area.
Some people have requested that they be able to wear headphones, to block out noise in those situations.
Are they not supposed to?
Well, in some firms,
in every workplace has huge earphones on.
That doesn't always work for employers, Then there are people who require breaks. I mean, I've dealt with like all sorts of issues or modified schedules. I need to come in on a different schedule because of, medication I have to take or, something like that. There's no limits on what you can ask for, but there are limits on what a company has to approve, but they at least have to have this discussion. And in this case, they can't make a decision based on your decision about your job based on your request for an accommodation. So if you came in, you asked for an accommodation, and the next day you were fired, that's not something an employer could do. Yeah, exactly. That being said, we have no idea what they settled for. It's private. Yeah. Good luck to her and the rest of her career, but it was very interesting.
At Conde, I basically made it like a sport to try to get approvals for flying business. And like every week I had something different. I was like, I twisted my ankle. My back is hurt. And like everyone knew what I was doing. Like, and I would say they approved it about half.
By the way, I have gotten that specific accommodation for certain clients because of health conditions.
Yeah, that's an important one.
And also when I review contracts, that's a routine thing I point out to executives, and they're always very thankful to me that I do point it out.
I did one recently with you where we set a number of hours that it had to be, which I think is fair. Like no one needs to fly you business class down to DC. But if you're like
Correct.
flying to Tokyo for someone,
Yes, for sure. Yes.
like when I worked for a wonderful, wonderful nonprofit and had to go to Istanbul, it was a very long trip in coach.
Wow, that's a tough one.
Long flight.
Yeah.
But I know, play me a tiny violin.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's do our heroes and zeros for the week.
Yes. All right. Who's your zero?
My zero is a very obvious one, and many people have cited this person as a zero, but I would say Kash Patel is my zero for a number of reasons. Give me a second to explain. It wasn't just because he looked like such a loser in the locker room, chugging beers and trying to be chums with, like, friendly with these hockey players who just, really had a remarkable achievement. I think as a boss, I'll just pull it back into our world. As a boss, there are times, as a manager or as a leader, there are times where you need to just step back and let your employees like do their own thing and have their moments. And I think the best leaders, recognize those moments and say,
I want the team to bond.
yeah, like, hey, thanks for the invite to your drinks, but why don't you guys just go? Or thanks for the invite to your...
I mean, I have many times with people that were on my team, like gone for one drink and then be like, you guys have fun.
Yeah. And so, of course, like, he's never run anything or led anything and has no qualifications for being the FBI director. And on top of that, he plunged this team. I mean, these are hockey players. They're not going to like tell the FBI director to leave if he shows up at their door. Instead, he plunged them into controversy. And by the way, I spent our money doing it. Shame on him. There's a ton of videos if you want to go watch of him criticizing Democrats for taking private jets.
Action that was delayed
Yeah.
because he had the jet.
Yeah, no, there's numerous instances of, the Charlie Kirk investigation, the Brown investigation. I mean, this guy has really interfered, because of his personal use of the jet. But I thought this was particularly loserish. He looked like an idiot, chugging beers, cursing, all this stuff. Like, get a life. Yeah. Top that, Laura.
I don't know if I can. This isn't quite a hero or a zero, but I'm calling out the snowball fight that happened in Washington Square Park.
Oh, wow. All right. That's a good one.
A major thing. Supposedly, a snowball fight got so heated that people called the cops, and then people were throwing snowballs at the cops, and it got so heated that Jessica Tisch, who I adore, I don't know her, but I think she's awesome, but she released a statement saying, like, we are going to look into this and prosecute it, and people need to treat the police officers better than this. And Mamdani was like, it looked like a snowball fight. Like, people should be nice to police officers, but this looked like a snowball fight. There's no felony here. And if I am a big believer that if people are hurt protecting us, there should be repercussions for that. But also, not everything is a felony. People were having a snowball fight.
And by the way, anyone who tries to break up a snowball fight is going to get hit with a snowball. Right? Whether it's a cop or a parent or whatever. But look, you shouldn't throw snowballs at cops. Obviously, that shouldn't be done.
I think good rule of thumb for a good life is don't throw things at cops.
But why? I don't even know why they were trying to break it up in the first place. It's kind of stupid.
Someone called and was like, help.
Another thing I want to point out that was brought up related to this, that was brought up in the speech last night by the misinformed president, was the fact that in New York City, when Mamdani asked for people to volunteer to shovel snow, and they were paid $30 an hour to do this, they were told to bring ID. And this was then... Yeah, it was true. And then it was used by the president to say, yeah, you have to show ID to shovel snow, but not to, vote.
Honestly,
look, the point is...
It's a losing issue for us.
No, but the point is you have to show ID to get paid, to fill out the documents to get paid. Anyone who's had a job had to produce ID to verify their I-9 and to submit their statements to get paid. Like, why are you making a thing out of this? It's idiotic. Anyway.
I don't know. I thought actually that was one of his more cogent points.
No. No,
I'm very
it
worried
was
about
not.
the SAVE Act. Don't get me wrong. I do think that the powers that be will not be upset if one of the side casualties of the SAVE Act being announced is married women, not as many married women being able to vote. Because the issue with that is if your name does not match that on your birth certificate or passport, you're going to have a problem voting. So I'm worried about that, but I also think we are heading towards a place where you'll need to show ID to vote. We shall see.
Yeah. Well, so much fraud, so much tilted media, yet he still won. Okay. My hero is Heather Delaney Reese, who has an amazing Substack where she actually watches the president's speeches and analyzes them in a very factual manner and points out things that I think people should be paying attention to. And she does it with a tone and a manner that is, I think, very effective and balanced.
A friend of yours?
No.
Oh, you're just a fan.
No.
What's the name
friend,
of her Substack?
It's just her name.
Okay.
It's just Heather Delaney Reese, I think.
Okay.
And I've read a bunch of them this week. I'll send you a few.
Okay.
But and then there's obviously an angle to it, people, so I'm warning you, but it's very factual, and I think that's important.
Love it.
And kudos to her for writing it.
I've got two. One,
Okay.
Kudos to all the Washington Post sports staffers who did their job through the Olympics, even though some of them, I think, weren't being paid. They continued to just do their job because it's what they love. And that was kind of amazing. People who worked through the Olympics. And just, even if they were paid for that, they knew they were being laid off and they still did a great job. And kudos to them.
You think Big Bezos can find a few bucks to pay these people? or did the checks not cash for him yet this month?
I didn't know. I'm not sure when exactly, whether they were set to be laid off before or after, but they just did their job in an impressive way, given what was going on. And the second one, I think you will be there with me on, watching Love Story and how much fun the 90s were. Like, the 90s in New York City, I know this is
amazing.
Aging, were a really, really good time.
Have you read the Mark Ronson book? That's a good chronicle of it as well. Maybe you should read that.
I lived it. I don't know.
Oh, okay. You don't need the books, but you like the TV show.
Yeah, I am not a Ryan Murphy fan. I don't love a Ryan Murphy show. There is way too... I love Naomi Watts, but I did think the show spent way too long with her in crazy hair and makeup, doing crazy things and swanning around and having a death scene. Spoiler alert, everyone, Jackie dies. So I don't love a Ryan Murphy show, and this felt soon, but I loved the look of people being out, getting to re-see people being out and about in the late 90s. And there's one scene where she says to a friend, go to Florent. And I'm like, oh, Florent was this... Did you ever go there when it was in the media district?
Yeah.
2 a.m., croque monsieur. It's the best.
By the way, a lot of that's happening right now in the city. It's a great time to be out, go out,
Yes, but everybody is like this.
Not the same.
Everybody is like this when they're out and like this. And many people look a little crazy now. I don't know. 90s were a lot of fun.
There was a lot of crazy people in the 90s. Let's not forget that.
I'm just saying we weren't inflating our faces and cutting them.
Oh, yeah. There was much less of
people
that.
just look like themselves.
Right.
I'm not against aesthetic improvements, but
right.
It's more extreme now.
Yeah.
All right.
On that note.
Good show, Peter. You
said
very interesting things today. Good job.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So did you.
Oh, thank you.
And I loved the tone of your voice. It was so appropriate for the topics.
Please let me know if my tone is ever upsetting.
Right. So on that note, thank you everyone for listening and watching the Across the Bar podcast this week. Please subscribe and share with your friends. Thank you, Sadie. And we'll see you all next week. Take care. Bye, Laura.